Hi, guys. So, in this session of an introduction to healing, uh, we want to discuss an introduction to Reiki. I have been a Reiki practitioner since 2002. And so, what I want to do is I want to kind of go over a little bit about my own personal history with Reiki, a little bit about what I know about the background, and then talk about some of the mechanisms of things as well. So we are talking about energy work, and when we begin talking about energy work, for a lot of people, we kind of it means that we step out into what's more of the woo woo kind of thing, a realm of faux science to a lot of people as well. What I can say is that there's actually quite a lot of data. There's a lot of studies that have been done on Reiki in that they have mapped how it has sped up healing, how it has, affected, different systems in different ways. You can Google that right now and just, look up basically research on Reiki. I won't go into as much of that, simply because it's not an area where I spend a lot of time having to convince myself, about whether or not something works by looking at the data. A lot of people do. So if you do, you're going to be pleasantly surprised at the amount of information that's out there. So for me, coming from, and this is in, the book that I'm working on about that's called the Path of the Wounded Healer, that identifies that if you come from a childhood where either certain toxic scenarios were modeled, certain aspects of trauma were modeled, where there's generational trauma, there's childhood trauma, things along those lines, that there is a pattern that there are individuals that are extremely sensitive to what we'll call energy. Now, we call it energy because there are, like when we talk about biofields and morphogenic fields, I mean, these different concepts of how human beings are very social creatures and we interact. And we can look at, concepts or theories of mirror neurons and know that there is something that's going on. Just looking at more simple creatures like birds and fish and seeing how schools and flocks, move almost in sync together. There's more than, just what's going on with the eye with a lot of people. But at the same time, there's a lot of nonverbal communication that's going on with people as well. So when I'm working with the client, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm watching eye movement, voice inflection, facial expression, body language. There's a lot of different cues that just the way that somebody is holding a part of their body tells me a lot about how they're holding something within their autonomic nervous system. And then there's objective patterns within the autonomic nervous system that when people are experiencing something in a certain part of the body that is paired and associated with certain stories of anxiety and trauma, whether it be not having control, being confused, not being to authentically express yourself, basically having, anger or heartache or, a topic of or situation of having a loss of power. Also there's a lot of body language that people will throw out there. So I'm paying attention to that. That's reading the energy of an individual. At the same time, Dawson Church, who is an amazing instructor and researcher, PhD, with EFT Universe. Great laugh, by the way. I can't stop mentioning that. He, in one of the first trainings that I went to with him, he asked if everybody would love to see an amazing energetic modality. And we were like, oh yeah. He's like, no, you're not going to believe how effective this tool is. And so, he got us hook, line, and sinker. And so then he went to demonstrate this technique, and he asked somebody to get up, and he gave him a really long 20-second hug, right? And then he talked about the science and the research behind that. So a hug is energy work. A mother's touch, a mother's kiss, kissing a boo-boo. This is energy work also. There's a lot of things that are part of our normal life where we are watching and we're picking up the signals, but we're also feeling. Like you can walk into a room sometimes with people that are sensitive or paying attention to this type of thing, and two people were fighting, and you may not have heard them or see them fighting, but you can just feel that there's something, kind of going on, maybe in the way that their behavior, is acting as well. With Reiki, or with people that are sensitive to energy, one of the things that we can say with certain stories is that people that are exposed to trauma in their childhood in certain ways, they're more sensitive to energy. And the reason they are frequently is because they had to in order to survive in their childhood. So in other words, they were sending out their sensors in childhood to pick up more information. Well, guess what happens when you spend a lot more time trying to pick up information for your survival? You begin becoming acclimatized to not paying attention to just the gross overall overarching information. You begin to refine that down to a sensitivity of subtle information as well. So you're going to pick up more refined data that is quite honestly available to anybody, and anybody, if they worked on that particular skill, could probably condition themselves to begin picking up that information as well. Now, I say that, but it's people's backgrounds and potentially genetics also, both nature and nurture, that kind of create an instrument that everybody may be a little bit different in the way that they read energy. So when we're using that term energy, we're talking about a lot of different fields. We're also talking about how when we look at Chinese meridians, we look at the way that neurons communicate, and in the science of how we see interactions in the synapses of the human body. Often things are happening so quickly, so fast, that we can't assign it to just a physical connection. There's something else going on, whether it be an electric magnetic field, what some people refer to as a biofield. I've heard people talk about the morphogenic field. That there's something going on to where we're picking up on information that's kind of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, or of that particular moment. So for me, when I was getting trained in massage, and we finished all of the education, and now we entered into what's known as the internship part, where you have to do a certain number of massages in order to qualify to go take your exam for your state exam. And I think I was in my second internship appointment with a client. They would come up to the school, and they would get kind of limited pricing for things. And I was in there maybe 10 minutes, and I was picking up on the fact that this client was having they were having an anxiety attack. And I literally started having a panic attack myself and I'd never had one of those before. But in that room, I started having a panic attack, and somehow I was able to breathe through a lot of it. It wasn't so overwhelming that I wasn't able to finish, but it was so incredibly uncomfortable. And I could not wait to finish that particular episode, that particular session. So I got out of the session, and the very next class I had was with an anatomy instructor who was incredibly intelligent. I had a lot of respect for her, and she happened to be a Reiki master. And I was basically just explaining to her what my experience was, and she gave me the information that said, well, Scott, you're an intuitive, and so you were picking up information from the client. And when you look at trauma bonding, you look at people that have a history of trauma in their childhood, that they're going to pick up on certain things that resonate with their patterns. There's all kinds of ways that we're attracted to people, or we're repulsed by people based off of what we learned and what's been conditioned within ourselves as well. And I get into a lot more of that whenever we talk about masculine and feminine energy, complementary wounds, and trauma bonding in relationships. So you want to look for that session as well. So I'm like, well, crap, what do I do? I just spent all this money and all this education, and that was horrible. I can't do that. And she said, okay, well, this is what you do. And she gave me the instructions to really engage and ground before I went into a session. She gave me a visualization of imagining that I'm a tree, that my feet grow roots, and that my hands are growing to the sky, and I breathe. And in other education that I got from her, she gave me a lot of other techniques of how to utilize visualization to basically say to the universe or to God or whatever the belief system was, to go, look, if this is not mine, as in this information, this energy, whatever that I'm picking up from this individual, if it's not mine, I don't want it. And by that way, using our willpower to bring down a dome of just cutting off us having access to that information and not needing it. So I did that, and it worked. I didn't have any, real issues, but I got curious about, of course, how this thing worked. And now that I was, really paying attention, I began to notice that things had happened to me, or things were happening to me. I would be at a party and it would be cold outside, and I would walk into the party and sit down by a fireplace next to somebody that was warm, and very shortly there would be a transference of energy there. Actually, it was the opposite. I was the warm one and they were cold, and all of a sudden there would be a transfer, and I would be the cold one then, and they would suddenly be very warm. That's a simple example. I would walk into a store and suddenly be picking up on being uncomfortable with certain scenarios, and then after listening to what was going on with some individuals that were the only other people in the store, began realizing that this couple was having they were actually having a fight. I had picked up on something before I even heard the conversation as well. So, continuing conversation with this Reiki master, who was our anatomy instructor, I ended up beginning to get training, and there was a group of people that had suddenly kind of heard about the same thing because I brought it up in class, that wanted to kind of get some training as well. So I attended a little bit of training with her. I got my Reiki 1 attunement, but I realized that in the way that she taught, that her and I, there were some things that didn't resonate, with how she was teaching certain things. And I won't go into detail about that. It's just that there was another individual that happened to be in the class also, that was another student, Nancy Capone, who also was a Reiki master. And with, just going to lunch, having just spent the last, amount of time in basic kind of training, and then I was continuing with her in advanced neuromuscular training as well, I felt a lot closer to her, and I trusted her. And that's a big deal. And so I then attended a weekend training with Nancy and got my Reiki 1. Now, I know that a lot of people can sometimes get Reiki 1, Reiki 2. I've heard of that being done, but Reiki was kind of old. Nancy was old school in such a way that she wanted me to, begin with Reiki 1, and she wanted me to practice, self-practice, really, get with that particular situation and develop a comfortability while I was working on clients as well. So I did. I listened to her advice, and when I received my attunement, and we can ask, what is an attunement? I've come to believe in the latter years that attunement may not be what I thought it was originally. But one way that it's described is, it's kind of like, if there's tuning forks and one tuning fork is vibrating at a particular frequency, you bring it up the other one that isn't, it's going to begin to vibrate at the same frequency as well. We can see this, in music and speakers with sand and sugar on it. There's a lot of different ways that frequency creates a particular vibration. And so what was being told to me was that I was getting attuned to a particular frequency that gave me access to this particular channel of energy. And Reiki means universal energy, universal life energy. So the history of Reiki, there was Dr. Yusui, who and there's several different stories that are told. There's one where he's a Japanese Christian monk, and he wanted us to see how Jesus had healed and Buddha had healed, and he prayed for it, and he received the first divine Reiki attunement. The reality is, Sui Ryoho Reiki, there was actually different versions of Ryoho that was done before he named that as well. There are lineages that have kind of been lost as well. It would be really interesting to kind of go back and see the history of that, but I don't think everybody was keeping track of records, and continuing lineages wasn't necessarily a priority when there was other things like war and trying to stay alive that were happening as well. There is a lineage that traveled through Hawaii. There's a very specific lady that continued that particular lineage, but even in where Dr. Yusui was and what she did, there were very big changes in how some of the attunements were passed on. A lot of it was people testing the material, and then as Reiki then kind of evolved, Tibetan Reiki, Egyptian Reiki, where individuals began utilizing different symbols and then playing with the felt sense of the energy to see what showed up. And often, like a lot of meditative practices as well, when you begin accessing a certain type of energy, you let the energy teach you. So although you may get instructions, you're open-minded to the fact that the energy has kind of its own instructions as well. Now, does that seem weird and out there woo-woo? Maybe. I don't know. Here's what I know. What I do is I follow the felt sense of energy. And immediately when I got my first attunement, and I got a couple of different attunements from different people, I began to feel energy. And for me, it's an aspect of, and in Reiki, you're basically saying Reiki on or Reiki off, but the moment that there was an intention of turning your Reiki on, I would feel it coming out of my hands, coming out of my feet, and coming out of my eyes. And the way that I would imagine a lot of that would be that I was taking in Reiki universal energy from everywhere, and it was coming into my heart and then going out through my appendages and those particular areas. So the really interesting thing about Reiki, that I am not the only one that I know that has experienced this, is that while I was still living in Dallas, having just kind of gotten into this, I would go to a movie and sit down next to somebody, and within a couple of seconds, my feet would light up and I would feel kind of an increase of heat. And since now I've taught Reiki, Reiki 2 specifically, I've been around a lot of different people that practice. Like in Reiki 2, when we add, Shokurei, a lot of the different symbols, and long distance, time travel kind of Reiki, where we can put intent and send energy back to maybe a hard time in our life, or we can send energy long distance to somebody. We did a practice where we would have somebody blindfolded on a massage table, and we would have the other practitioners that were learning around the edges of that particular room, and one at a time we would have them practice sending long distance energy, and we'd have the individual that was blindfolded to try to guess whose energy it was. And one of the things that if you're paying attention to the feel of someone's energy, it became pretty obvious pretty quickly to me and to other people I know, that people have a different signature of their energy. Like mine comes across as really warm. When I'm giving energy to someone, it kind of feels like a soft, warm quilt. It is a metaphor that I've heard a lot of people use, or I've used and they agreed with. One then my wife, who is also a Reiki master, when she starts doing Reiki, it's like a volcano. It's just like really, really hot. And there were some students, there was one student in particular, it was just such a contrast that he was doing Reiki too, and his energy felt kind of like cool butter. That was an unusual one. He also had some disassociation where he was having trouble feeling, but it felt like cool butter to other people. So it's kind of fascinating. So you're like, well, Scott, what is this Reiki? Well, one of the stories of Dr. Usui is that he went onto a mountaintop, and he was basically of a lineage where he was, being very austere. He was fasting, and he had reached a point where he had committed to a process of enlightenment, or I'm going to be austere enough that I'll die. He was prepared for that, is the way that the story goes. And he had these pebbles in his hand, or he had these pebbles that he was keeping track of the days. And I think it was 21 days that he went to this particular mountain. He was on the mountain, and he was asking for this understanding, and he, there was part of the story says there was a blinding ball of light that came at him, knocked him out. And when he came to, he had received a divine Reiki attunement. And so, did the symbols come before? Was he studying those before? Did they come after? I'm sure there's a lot more in the history of how that actually went. I was never as interested in the history. I'm not necessarily a historian as much as I'm a soul scientist, where I'm going to test things. And I'm open-minded to hearing how things work. And then I'm going to go try to understand it both, from an aspect of, does it work spiritually? Does it work scientifically? I'm going to test it from a lot of different angles. And that's what I would advise anybody that was looking at any new modality, especially in energy work, is to be a soul scientist. Because there may be very specific reasons why you don't pick up on a felt sense of energy movement, because you're not conditioned that way. You haven't spent time working with that. You haven't wanted it for one aspect. I mean, like, it's an aspect of you have to be paying attention. Again, like in Vipassana, one of the things that we begin noticing when we're scanning is that the gross sensations of density begin to vibrate in a different way, and we become much more refined, much more subtle. We go from gross to subtle felt sense of our sensations, and that's a transference of our autonomic nervous system from a heavy, holding on to something, to feeling a free flow and freedom, and feeling very, very light as well. So for me, when energy shows up, and I'm listening to the energy. So a lot of the modalities that I then was either introduced to or that I tried after I, got my Reiki, I was listening to the Reiki energy, because frequently what would happen to me over and over again is I would be in a place where there was somebody that I needed to talk to, or at least that was the belief system that I had that played out and ended up becoming true over and over and over again. And that was that either I had something this person really needed to hear, or more times than not, this person had something that I really needed to hear also. And whenever there was what I would call a spiritual interaction like that, my Reiki would turn on, like my energy would start, kind of flowing in some particular way. So as a massage therapist, as a Reiki practitioner, and then later as a counselor, I've begun to not only pay attention to that, I've begun to listen to the different flavors of that. And so being a massage therapist, for me, it was really, really wonderful, because being introduced to Reiki, very early, as a Reiki practitioner, you begin operating as a pipe. So in other words, and this is true of any energy work, one of the rules is that we can't have ego. If we get to a point where we're kind of like, ooh, look how wonderful I am, look what I can do, I'm the great, healer, the great Reiki master, or whatever, like, you've already landed the plane, like you've already crashed, right? So a big part of the commitment of being a Reiki practitioner is that I'm being a channel for this energy, for it to go for this individual's highest purpose, and quite honestly for mine, because I'm being a pipe. What does a pipe do? Well, it handles the flow. Well, what does the flow get to do? It gets to feel the energy. So what does that do? It means I get to enjoy that energy also. So I would frequently end the session and feel better than before I started the session. So, that's kind of cool. So there's patterns and there's responsibilities that came with Reiki. One of the things that we were taught in Reiki 1 was, like, if you're out there and you're mowing the lawn and, you're stupid enough to, try to get something out from underneath and you chop off your finger, don't give yourself Reiki, because Reiki is going to heal up it's going to speed up the healing process. If you want to go get that thing reattached before you have any Reiki that's going on there. If you're somewhere and there's suddenly a bone that's broke, don't be given that broken bone Reiki. Go get that bone reset before you put that Reiki on there as well. So, but for things like, rashes, burns, sunburns, I always found that the comfort, the felt sense of comfort that would help an individual's person relax, much like mindfulness-based stress reduction, in the way that we're holding our reality. It's like the energy is sending a signal to the neurons of the body that's basically going, hey, this ain't as bad as we thought it was, as well. So Reiki was really, really good to me during my massage years. And this really wonderful thing happens when you stand over a massage table and you try to feel other people's energy for 10 years. Kind of the same thing that would happen if you suddenly lost your sight, then your hearing would become a lot more acute. It's nothing that's really fancy or special. It's just that if you pay attention to something, if you practice with something, you're going to get a more subtle, felt, refined sense to how that particular energy is flowing and the information that you're picking it up. So for me, I know that a lot of people read energy in different ways. I would always start every massage session that I had with the feet. And the reason is because in reflexology, the parts of the feet are representative of the parts of the body. And so as you're sitting there and you're working, doing thumb glides or doing, thumb presses in some way on the bottom of the foot, I would also be watching the individual's energetic responses, their nonverbal communication, and if I felt something while I was working on the feet, sometimes a certain amount of time, it would be because there was something going on with the foot, but a larger portion of time, it was representative of something that was going on in the body. And so if we were in the area for, say, for example, digestion, I could ask, hey, do you got something, going on in your stomach or digestion? Or like, yeah, I've been bloated since blah, blah, blah. Or, a woman would tell you that she was having menstrual cramps or something along those lines as well. So I learned to begin paying attention to that. And the more that you do that, the more information that you begin to pick up. And what's really great about being a massage therapist when I was I would converse with people about it. And so that gave you an opportunity to get confirmation and go, hey, am I crazy? This is what I'm feeling. They were like, no, that's what's happening. And I began to learn to build confidence on that because it was happening so frequently to where I began to lean in on that. And that has served me, kind of since. So following the Reiki, there's 3 different Reiki symbols, and I'm not here to teach people Reiki. Go see a Reiki master that's teaching Reiki to kind of learn about these things. But there are very specific things that mean certain things. Like one symbol is put all the power of the universe here. Another one is for mental emotional healing. Another one is for long distance. And there's a master symbol that basically allows you. And there's other ones that are utilized to seal energy as well. And when you expand out into different other types of Reikis as well, it expands us to a lot of other different symbols. And the way that I would explain that, or try to, is that there's a vibration, there's a frequency. It's like if we go like this and we go, well, what does this mean? Well, if anybody remembers, this is the Boy Scout thing. Well, what's the list of things? Trustworthy, prepared, be prepared is the motto. This whole list of things, I'm sad that I can't remember what they all are, that this represents. In the same way, when you're utilizing a symbol, it's kind of like you're creating an energy anchor that locks in these other things that you're having an intention, and it's giving you something to focus on in order to channel that energy in a very specific way. And so we're channeling the energy, and it's going where the individual needs for their highest good. You will begin to notice that there can be predictable things in the way that somebody feels the energy and the comfort that somebody feels. Just in the beginning of learning Reiki, one of the things that we learn is kind of the 12 different positions for us to basically give ourselves, our own self-Reiki treatment, where we stay at a particular position, on the front and back, top and bottom, for 5 minutes. And that's, and boom, you've knocked out an hour doing an entire Reiki session on yourself. And the benefits of that, if you sat and just said, I'm going to focus on parts of my body, whether I was doing Reiki or not, you would still get stress reduction. I mean, there's a relaxation method as well, where we squeeze and then let go, squeeze and let go, the progressive relaxation. So there's a lot of things that can be explained in how Reiki works that can also be explained in other stress reduction techniques. For me, I have an open mind, an open heart, that I'm not going to throw things away, even if I don't necessarily understand all the mechanisms, but I'm going to try to understand the mechanisms as fast as I can. And I think that as we do more and more studies, we're going to get more, but there's well over 100 studies on Reiki about speeding up healing and its psychological comfort, that it affects somatic processing. It affects somatic receptors in such a way that it will have an effect on psychological symptoms. Psychological symptoms and somatic symptoms can be parallel with each other, and they're going to affect one another. So Reiki is it's weird to some people. I loved it. I loved it because it was a way that I could comfort myself. It was a way that I could turn it on and immediately relax and go to sleep. It was a way that I could really, truly create an environment of safety, comfort, relaxation, warmth, heat, for a client on a table as well. And because it facilitated me having a stress reduction where I felt better after working with clients than I did when I first started. And if you have a tool like that that helps you stay decharged to where you're not taking on your client's energy, then absolutely do it. Now, along with Reiki, there comes some ethical aspects. There comes some hygiene of how you handle yourself, how you clean, how you ground, how you finish, how you clean again, how you operate within the aspects. And I haven't done a Reiki session on an individual except for myself and my family in probably, I don't know, 6-7 years as well. But I'm constantly doing Reiki because I'm always paying attention to the light up of, okay, what's going on? There's a connection with me and someone else that's going on, and that's always proven to be true. And I use that with the other modalities to where I follow the message of the energy within my body, and that for me began with the sensitivity that I began picking up with Reiki. Now, since then, there's muscle testing, there's feeling of fullness, a feeling of negativity. There's different ways for us to test for information to get the opinion of our body that can be a real solid guidance for things that we've just been trying to think our way through as well. So that's my very, very brief, kind of synopsis rendition of Reiki. In my journey, I went on after, I think, year 2, got my Reiki 2, went on after year 3, ended up getting my Reiki 3 and my Master Attunement. And my Reiki Master, Nancy, who's now in North Carolina, shout out, you're watching this, she gave me a real gift. Number one, she also, as kind of a graduation present, she guided me through a shamanic processing kind of thing. She had these audios that was like the calling of the spirits, the journey, and the return. And she guided me through a way to travel in your imagination in a power journey, on the table, in her studio with the lights down, with the music on. That was really, really powerful for me, where we can choose to either go to an angelic realm, the underworld, or, Middle Earth, and each having their own different characters and looking for your guides, in that. And it was fun. It was a fun exercise. I had not been exposed to shamanic, journeying previously. That's its own thing, shamanic journeying as well. I was lucky enough to have a Reiki master that had a great sense of humor and was incredibly knowledgeable, and she was very organized. She cared about the lineage, she cared about the ethics, she cared about hygiene of the energy and how you worked with people, how you sealed them back up and all that. So if you have an interest in Reiki locally, Julie Rainwater, I know, is a Reiki master that teaches. If she still is, I would recommend her. She's phenomenal, fabulous. There may be others. And again, if you're practicing an energy modality and you want us to talk about it, you want us to do a session on it, on something that's maybe more than Reiki, or maybe it's an expansive aspect of Reiki, and you've got your own stories, this would be a great format for it. We'd love to kind of hear it. I mean, this series is all about an introduction to healing. And so that involves people hearing about things that maybe they never heard about before. I can't imagine, some people who've never heard about Reiki might hear that and go, well, that's craziness. Well, 20 years, I'm going to tell you that it's not. It's actually an incredible gift, and I would invite you to go look at the data before you throw something away that's really quite valuable as well. So, namaste. We'll see you guys in the next session. This has been our brief talk on Reiki. Take care, guys.